Recording in progress.
Thank you, Will. I feel like the party is behind me. It's behind us. But I have my back to you all. I apologize. It's good to see you here. I know, definitely good stuff going on. I am Victoria Jetty, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the Addison Central School District. Today, December 19th. We're here at 208 Charles Avenue. Let's start by going around and doing introductions. So we start with you, Steve.
Steve Warzek.
Mary Noble.
Chip Malcolm. Brian Bauer. Peter Rose, Superintendent.
Victoria Jetty. Suzanne Buck.
David McCallum.
Barbara Wilson. Mary Gill.
Will Hatch, Technology Director.
And if we could have administrators.
Heather Crowley, Executive Assistant.
Matt Carinci, Director of Finance and Operations.
Nicole Carter, Director of Equity and Student Services.
Caitlin Steele, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. We've got a lot of principals, right?
Principals, go ahead.
Bruce. Bruce McIntyre, Director of Facilities.
Eric Sears, Principal, Salisbury Community School.
Ben Travis, Principal, Erin Hogan.
Jill was local Principal at Moms.
Matthew Griffin, Principal of Bridgewater.
Heather Robb, Principal at Cornwall.
Andy Johnson, Principal at Shore.
Justin Campbell, School Principal. Mike Judah, Principal of Park.
Great. Thank you very much. And do we have any board members on attending? No. Okay. Great. All right. At this time, I can't see, are there names on it? So we're just empty time, and then Leah Standard. Oh, okay, all right, great. At this time, we'll take public comment. If you are on Zoom and wish to make a public comment, please raise your Zoom hand. We'll start with folks in the room. If you wish to make a public comment, please raise your hand.
I'll continue because I prepared some written comments to keep me on time. My name is Mary Slozar. I live in Waitridge. I have 2 daughters in our district. One of them is thriving and she's doing awesome. The other one's not. She has disabilities and this district is failing her and she is not alone. I'm here today because we've been talking, there are so many families that are in the same situation and we're trying to work together with this school district to address our kids' needs. I want to share a few reflections to kind of guide your own reflections, I hope, after my public comment. I want to emphasize that this is not a niche issue. It's a systemic issue. It's a systemic problem in our district across all towns, all schools, all grades. It is also extremely related to the work the district is doing on equity. There's a lot of focus on socioeconomics, race, ethnicity, all of that for good reason. Disability needs to be up there on that list, not only for its own right, but because there's so much intersection between disability and the other things that matter. I also have a sense that there's a perception among district leaders, perhaps also on this board, or not school leaders, but mainly board members and other people who think about these things, that special education is so regulated by state and federal policy that there's not a role for this group. I want to tell you that is incorrect. You can play a very, very important role in meeting our kids' needs. Budgeting is a perfect example, which is relevant for today's conversation. So I would encourage you, as you consider the proposed budget for special education, you might ask, does this budget keep ACSD in the category of being a low spender compared with other districts in the state? If it does, do we think that's okay? Why? What's driving that? Does this budget make it possible to hire the skilled staff we know we need? Our principals last meeting highlighted how much they need behavior interventionists, mental health providers, literacy interventionists, and so on. And then what about our special educators? Our district is investing a lot in paras. Paras are awesome. They're needed. They play important roles, but they do not replace special educators. They cannot teach our children, our dyslexic children, to read, for example. I wonder if this budget also makes it possible to both attract and retain the staff, the skilled staff that we need, which is very hard, as you know. But it's not enough to say we tried. What is our district doing to make sure we get those skilled staff? I also want to mention there's more that you could do, but another really important one is around culture. If this board starts prioritizing special education and incorporating into your own priorities and meeting and committee work, that is reflected in our school staff and in our community members that special ed matters, and we are prioritizing our highest need children. We need a tone that reflects respect for our disabled students, places priority on meeting their needs, and supports their families, which currently I can tell you many families do not feel supported by this district. In that spirit, I also want to comment from the last board meeting. One board member made a comment in the context, and I trust best intentions, I don't mean that, but I'm highlighting this as an example. In the context of expressing frustration over not being able to do everything for everybody, the need for small group instruction at the high school was compared to the need to play sports. I hope it goes without saying that these do not fall in the same category of needs, and suggesting that they do could be interpreted as not taking special education needs seriously. Finally, I know I'm probably over time, I just want to mention something really positive. So I want to shine a light on an exciting development in our district with the leadership of our new special education leaders, Tracy and Laura. I understand that Peter Burrows and Nicole Carter have approved setting up a special education parent advocacy council, and we're pumped. We're pumped to be at the table with you and help you guys learn from the people on the ground how to do better. So a group of parents, we're working with Laura and Tracy to get this council up and running over the next few months. We hope and expect to engage with you and continue that conversation forward. Yeah, we're excited about that. So we got a lot of problems, but we're excited about the step of setting up this council and taking parents seriously and other caregivers. And anyone who's interested in participating in that effort should reach out to Laura, Tracy, or to me if you prefer a parent contact. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you state your name again?
Yeah, Mary Slozar, with Waybridge.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Yeah.
Anyone else here for public comment? Yes.
Good evening, members of the ACSD School Board Committee. My name is Michelle Steele, and I've been a teacher for 17 years with 11 years teaching language acquisition here at MUHS. And I'm the lucky recipient of a Fulbright Distinguished Award in Teaching Research to conduct educational research in Morocco in 2023. And I'm reaching out to the board regarding the recent denial of my application for sabbatical leave for the fall semester of the 2023 school year. The application shared with you via email was submitted to the administration in writing on November 3rd of 2022. However, this application never made it to the school board due to a lack of administrative support, and I believe the board should be aware of the circumstances, especially in the context of negotiating the next master agreement and budgeting for next year. Per section 9.1 of the master agreement, quote, A, sabbatical leaves may be granted for programs of professional improvement. Professional improvement may include graduate study, travel, research, or other programs. The board may award the sabbatical if the leave request is deemed of value to the school system. The applicant shall provide evidence of ability to complete the tasks, projects, or programs which form the underlying basis for the request for the sabbatical, end quote. I am thrilled to be one of only 20 teachers nationwide to receive this award in 2022. The 12-member J. William Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board, appointed by President Joe Biden, read my application and selected it from hundreds of others. To have a teacher from our tiny state, let alone ACSD, represented in this elite group of 20 educators nationwide is an accomplishment in itself. This highly prestigious state-run program is the U.S. government's flagship international educational and cultural exchange program. My proposed research relates to issues of import at ACSD, including our new strategic plan, specifically targeting inclusion and creating culturally responsive curriculum. Much more detail, including detailed benefits to ACSD and our students, are explained in my leave request. The research project is for ACSD. I'll be working for the district, representing ACSD and MUHS for the duration of my fellowship. Upon return, I'll be able to share my new expertise with colleagues and students at ACSD. In order to complete this educational research abroad, I requested just 4 months of sabbatical leave for the fall of 2023. This request was denied. While Fulbright does include a stipend for international travel and living expenses, it does not include any compensation for salary or missed pay. I'm here tonight to ask the board to consider the gap between the language outlined in the master agreement and the practice of sabbatical leave in reality. I think it's also important for the board to note that having sabbatical leave in our contract is very attractive to current and potential educators. Throughout this process, I've spoken with several teachers at ACSD who stated not only were they aware of the language in this contract, some even chose this district over another because of the sabbatical benefit. And yet, from what I understand, sabbatical leave has not been granted in the district in over 15 years. Furthermore, I'd like to bring up the idea of teacher equity. I've always believed that I worked in a district that encouraged teachers to take initiative, embody lifelong learning, and stay updated on best practices to better meet the needs of our students. A sabbatical is an equitable way to make sure all teachers have access to programs of professional improvement. Sadly, in reality, it seems that teachers with ample means may pursue these opportunities via unpaid leave, while teachers with more modest circumstances, as is my case, are unable to do so. When sabbatical requests are not granted, teachers who cannot afford unpaid leave are prohibited from pursuing similar fellowships or professional opportunities. I implore the board to consider the following. Is sabbatical leave really a benefit for the teachers of ACSD if all requests are routinely denied? And are we falsely advertising benefits that in practice do not exist? Are we supporting teachers who take initiative or forcing teachers to choose between pay and professional growth? How will the board address the tension between the strategic plan's equity commitments and reserving this type of professional development for teachers with ample means to take unpaid leave? I would like the board to consider the kind of culture we are fostering or not fostering when we are unable to grant requests like mine. I would like the board to consider how language in the master agreement may be changed to make these requests more accessible to staff. I ask the board to consider whether this is truly a benefit available at ACSD or just empty policies, and how the master agreement and or our budget should be amended to reflect that. I ask the board, in a time of hardship and educator shortages, what messages are we sending to teachers, and how are we attracting and retaining teachers from diverse backgrounds? How can we intentionally support them? A fellowship and sabbatical are something I've been working toward for much of my career, and I hoped my request would be presented to the board for consideration. But now it feels like an empty promise that the administration has no intention of honoring or even bringing to the board ever. If a Fulbright doesn't qualify for a sabbatical, I implore the board. What does? So here I am, a veteran teacher in an IB rural district, being denied support. I teach in a district that wants educators to be internationally minded and globally educated. And yet I'm faced with turning down a rare and prestigious Fulbright Distinguished Awarded Teaching Research due to lack of administrative support. Will an IB rural district really let one of our experienced and dedicated educators turn down this opportunity when we have clear language about sabbatical leave established in the master agreement? Professionally speaking, I'm absolutely devastated by the thought of turning down such a significant award, but I want to be clear that this is the consequence when the district cannot and does not support teachers in this way. My initiative to go above and beyond and take on research for the district seems to have been met with resistance and rejection. Thank you all for hearing me tonight and for your consideration of this matter. Thank you for your time. I'm available for questions now or any time.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
So my name's Steve Cash. I live up in Brooklyn. Had many conversations with a number of you about governance over the years. And this is not about governance tonight. Here to talk about operations. My son is a kindergartner up at Ripton. And on the 12th of this month, Ripton School had no heat. So my son got to go to kindergarten in his jacket because the school had no heat. I understand sometimes things happen with facilities, problems arise, I get it, that happens. It's kind of surprising, but that was the situation. I unfortunately was not told about that situation for 2 days until a staff member at that school told me about it, so that I could explain to my son why he had to wear his coat in the school. So that's fairly problematic to me. I think that if a building does not have heat, I think it would be good to message that to parents in some form or another. Like I said, I understand mistakes happen, but that's, if a mistake happens, own up to it and navigate it, in my opinion. And the other point I wanted to raise is that our principal at our school is there not very frequently. And I suspect from the first public comment we heard, our principal, Tracy Harrington, may be doing some really good work with special education. And I understand that. I think that's extremely important work. And I'm glad the district is taking that seriously, and I hope they continue to. What I would say is that maybe making a school's principal also that special education lead is something you might want to consider, because those both seem like pretty important missions that might be good to get some real staff support for. I don't know a ton about staffing, but one thing I do know is that if you overload people with work, they're probably not going to stick around. So I would just encourage some thought on that. I think that's about all I have. So,
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
My name is Ben Long. I'm a high school teacher here at MUHS, and I'm here in support of Mrs. Steele and Michelle's request to have her sabbatical considered and looked at by the board. And I know there's a number of other teachers here also in support, so if anybody else here wants to just stand up briefly, if that's why you're here, and you want to just sort of demonstrate that that's what we're doing here, is just articulating to the board that many of us also are interested to hear what the response is about this language in the contract. I'm one of the teachers that she mentioned who I had an offer at Mount A and an offer at Middlebury, and I was considering the two, and I said, oh, at Middlebury I could potentially have a sabbatical. My wife is a professor, she gets sabbaticals. I thought that'd be great if we could sync them up, and I could come up with a great research project that would make it worthwhile. And now I'm considering maybe that's not even an option. So, thank you.
Do you want to go back online because more people have joined? Oh, wait, one more.
Hi, I'm Henry Lang. I teach language and literature. I use he, him pronouns. I'm here just to comment in solidarity with my Black students who had their question come up again about the Black Lives Matter flag, and just being left with the understanding that the reason it's not up this year is because the board wasn't able to renew the timeline from last year. And so I would appreciate a more official response to pass on to them if there's a reason why the board couldn't vote to have their statement of humanity go back up. So thank you for your commitments to building an anti-racist school district.
Thank you.
Yes.
Pages. I'm Maria Graham. I'm from Middlebury. I just wanted to say I love the teachers' show of support. There's actually a lot of us in the room too for this special education group that Mary is really spearheading with Tracy. So I won't make us all stand up. They're on Zoom and they're here in the room unless you'd like to. But it's a very nice group that they're starting, and it wasn't just Mary. She's just the most eloquent of us. So, we appreciate you hearing us, and I do. My daughter is at the high school. She's got a great group of teachers and a great team, and they're working so hard. And so part of this is also just wanting to support our teachers and the team members who are doing a really great job and making sure that they don't get burned out and keep learning and growing, because it's definitely, she's in a great spot compared to where we've been in some other years. So we appreciate you really taking that seriously as a board, working with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Seeing none, if anyone on Zoom cares to make public comment, please raise your Zoom hand. You'll have to read them because I can't see. Yeah. I don't see any hands going up. Okay. Seeing none, we will move on to the next portion of our meeting. If I could get a motion to approve the minutes of not June 27th, but actually December 5th, that'd be great.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments about the minutes of December 5th? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes of,
Could I have one comment?
Yes.
I mentioned it, to Mary Heather. We had a long discussion on remuneration for school board members. And it was somewhat complicated because there were a number of amendments that came up that put in numbers. When the votes were finally taken, it was a 5-4 vote. And I felt, being one of the negatives in that vote, that since it was an issue that was quite divided and a little convoluted, that I really felt that the vote, the individual's vote should be mentioned. Now, maybe that's not always the case with every issue, I understand, but this one I found we were pretty well separated on this, and I just felt that I had to say that. It's not against the minute taker, but I just feel that should be declared. I know it doesn't have to be, but I think on an issue like that, that will have a certain amount of public opinion, that it's worthwhile, you sort of know where your board members stand.
Yep.
So I request, if we have that information, that be amended, that be placed in the minutes.
Steve, did you want to?
Just a point of order, I don't think if you do a voice vote that you can then individualize it. You can call at the time for a roll call vote where you can record each individual, and so I think in the future, that if it is a voice vote like that and it's close, that we may want to then call for a roll call vote. But the first proposal went down 4-5, and then the second one was approved 5-4. So Chip is right. I mean, it was fairly evenly divided. So.
Do we have a procedure on that?
I don't disagree with you, although we did put our hands up, as I remember. Now, that isn't a roll call vote.
Right. Statute does require that if there's yays and nays and abstentions, that you are supposed to, in your minutes, you are supposed to note who the nays and the abstentions are. So if you are raising hands, then you would know who's who. But if it wasn't recorded, we can only learn from it and move forwards.
Well, it is easily, I mean, we have
We
the
have it
meeting
easily.
recorded, it's easily checked, and so I'm perfectly willing to add that information.
Okay, so perhaps according to statute, do the yays or the nays and abstentions. There were no abstentions, but.
Right.
Okay,
So do we have to make a motion to amend the minutes?
that's what this is. We have a motion on the table and this was discussed.
We just did it, okay.
Yeah,
Did someone make a motion?
so the
Barbara
motion to
approved it.
approve the minutes, but we
Oh,
could,
right, oh, yeah.
Barbara approved and you seconded, actually.
Okay. You have to make to amend.
So this is
I'm fine with them, just have
This
a
is the discussion,
Okay.
and now we'll say, all those in favor of approving the minutes with the amendment
Right.
suggested by Chip. Vote in favor.
We could also table these minutes until that information is added and then approve them later, as I recall.
Do that. But I for one trust that Mary Heather will do it.
Okay.
the main
But
thing
if
is,
you're-
I'll just need to make sure, is that when they're amended, I need to make sure I notify Heather so that she can repost them online, so that the updated minutes.
So would you prefer that we wait and approve these at the next meeting?
It doesn't matter, I think it's fine to do it now, if y'all are comfortable on voting it now.
So having said that, all those in favor of approving the minutes with the correction or the addition that Chip mentions, please say aye. Aye.
Raise your hand.
All those opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain, I wasn't here.
Thank you. All right, the minutes have been approved. Bills, Dr. Malcolm.
There are two sets of bills. One read on the 13th of, or thereabouts, 13th of December. First, on the 13th, there was a general fund number of $1,686,964.67. There were some big pieces of that were coming out of VHI health and programs that we pay at some point. So it was 109,000, 259,000, quite a few big numbers which elevated that to 1.6. The second part of that were the warrants, payroll warrants. The first one for $4,940, like that one. The second one for $835,861.84. And the third one, even better, $241.25. Second group was ready today. Barbara, you were there later? Yes, thank you. General fund number of $212,687.34. And a payroll number of $887,370.
$300.70 or $370?
Yeah.
Sorry.
What's it? I'll give it here. Anyway, I make a motion that we approve those bills.
I'll second it. Great. Any questions or comments for the finance team about the bills? Seeing none, all those in favor of paying the bills, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Hi, Lindsay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, pay the bills. On to refer to the board. Today's meeting is going to focus on the budget. Last meeting, we had the principals come give their budget presentations, and two of our principals were unable to make it. So we're going to start tonight with Turkey and.
Actually,
you can say.
He's just gonna talk for us.
no, I really want to hear you talk. But I was thinking it might make sense for me to set the context first, and then the two of them can present, and will then flow from the two of them into Matt presenting and our central office leaders, etc. I think just the overview context might be a nice way to start.
Great.
Okay. So can you pull up the presentation? Yeah. And while you're doing that, Matt, do you want to maybe move up here to sit at the table? You see this? I was looking for his name.
Okay, all right, I'll get
Maybe it's not in there.
I'm gonna go.
You're gonna have to make it. Okay. I'll fly under the radar. Okay. So I'm gonna, as I mentioned, I'm gonna start us out here. This is draft one. We think it's I think we have a lot of positives to share in terms of the development of the budget, what FY24 will look like, and we'll talk a little bit about what we see coming in FY25. We've been kind of sprinkling that through a lot of our presentations, and we'll continue to do that tonight. We're in a very unusual time period now with federal funding from the pandemic, and that has really shifted so many different things that those of you that have been following our budget over the many years we've been producing a budget will know that things were kind of like ticking along at a somewhat steady pace and were predictable, and we've been in 3 years of real unpredictable. And so we're kind of on the tail end of that, and I'll talk a little bit about that, hand it off to our principals, and then Matt will kind of take it away and present the other folks that are presenting tonight. Okay, so I'll start off with the observations and objectives, then we're going to be going through the budget landscape, talking about where our equalized pupil number came in, looking at our enrollment over time to give you kind of a snapshot of how that is impacting our budget, discussing drivers' responses, talking about the fund balance, and going through all of our different, the major functions of this budget. So I wanted to start just by kind of reaffirming where we are with the fiscal climate. We talked about this at the last meeting. We got our tax commissioner's letter. That is probably the most telling piece of information we get in a budget year, is looking ahead to where the state's education fund is and how that is going to be supported and what kind of pressures that's going to put on school districts. The big thing we're looking for in that tax letter is not necessarily helping us to gauge how much we're spending budget to budget, but more what is the impact going to be to each one of our stakeholders in our community. This year, as you remember from the last meeting, and I know Matt's going to go into this in a little more detail, we've got a $63 million surplus right now in the state ed fund. And just to kind of go over this again, while we vote locally, our local vote for our budget makes up about a third of the total funding for our budget. So a lot of people in our community think when they go out to vote, their money is going directly to the school in a straight line. Instead, it's actually going to the state, and that's only 1/3 of the total funds that the state is raising for schools. So it's a fairly complicated system. That large fund, right, that the state uses to then pay for all of the budgets that are adopted and approved by local districts, either puts pressure or less pressure. That $63 million is going to mean, and you'll see this later on tonight, even with what is a pretty standard increase due to inflation and other pressures, while our budget's going up around 9%, our tax rate is dropping pretty significantly, and that's related to this surplus that, assuming that the legislature keeps this yield number, this yield number is not finalized yet. Throughout this legislative session, as budgets come in and people say, you know, the state thought that the total, if you remember from that letter, they predicted the total budget increase was going to be 8.5% statewide. So if they got that wrong and all of a sudden it's 10.5, after communities like ours have these conversations, we want to add this, we want to do that, then they have to change that yield number to reflect they need to raise additional funds. They thought they had to raise 8.5, now they have to raise 10.5. So this is the beginning of, the legislature is just about to get started. I don't expect that number is going to change significantly. So I do think that we are going to continue with this surplus, and that there will be a highly positive impact on our local tax number. So that's kind of like, in terms of where we are in the fiscal climate, we're in year 3 of federal funding. We're in the last year of our ESSER funding. Kind of ostensibly, we do have like 3 months in FY25, but really we're talking about 1 more year of ESSER funding. So this is kind of the final year of these 3 kind of strange years where everything that we thought was true was no longer true. And we're thinking about, as we're in this final year, what does FY25 bring and how do we set ourselves up best for that? In terms of staffing and resources in this budget, we have continued to support the intervention positions, the additional support positions that we've put in place, and are looking at you're going to hear more about this tonight, so I won't go into great detail, but we are looking at other ways to support students, students who maybe aren't being successful in a general ed classroom, students who need flexible pathways. We're really kind of trying to look across every single student in our district and think about the systems that we have in place and where do we need to really hold firm and where do we need to think more creatively about meeting student need at a time when, as we all know, the last couple of years have been incredibly challenging and fatiguing for everybody, for adults, for students, for our entire community. So that there's just no way that does not impact our students and their needs. And so that is something that in this budget, I think all of us feel pretty confident that we're looking at kind of those supports that students need and are funding them. That isn't to say that this budget guarantees we can hire these positions, right? And we've talked about that this year, and we talked about that last year as well, that we still have a number of positions that have remained open that we can't fill. We could go out and try to find some of the positions that are challenging to find. We've had a hard time hiring some of our intensive needs paraprofessionals. We've had a hard time hiring special educators. We've had a hard time hiring positions like BCBAs. And these are the kinds of positions that all school districts around us are also trying to hire. So we're not obviously living in a vacuum here, right? Like all of the other districts are also in the process of trying to hire these positions. So this is something that we are also, as we look to FY24 and the hiring season that is starting, of ways to get our reach as far as we can and work to hire these positions. In terms of programs and supports, I just mentioned that there's a lot of work happening, I think, over the next year as we learn more about Act 173 and what that's going to do to our special ed funding and hence what we can purchase and provide and things that may change and increase flexibility, which the state has been talking about for at least a year and a half, 2 years, that a big reason why Act 173 was supported by the field was that it did start to break down some of the walls between special ed and general ed and allowed us to think more holistically, which is really, really important. So that work will continue, and I think in a lot of ways FY24 puts a lot of pressure on us to really look at what are those systems that we need and gives us, frankly, the ability to have more in our budget than we normally do with our increased grant funding, to look at, and again, this is looking to FY25, what are the essential core aspects of the student experience that we absolutely have to fund, and what are those structures to support students at all the different tiers of learning. So that is, I think, the work between now and this time next year, where we're going to come back with none of those federal funds anymore, and we'll be looking at really kind of like pinpointing, using both kind of qualitative and quantitative data. These are the things that we think are going to be really successful and kind of foundational and stable as we move into and maybe back to, in some ways, a more kind of consistent, steady stream of revenue as opposed to what we've experienced over the last number of years. That's kind of the overview of the budget in terms of kind of climate and some of the things that we've been thinking about broadly at a high level. The fund balance, we have $1.5 million fund balance. We are meeting with the Finance Committee this week, and we're going to be talking with the Finance Committee about suggestions, recommendations related to that fund balance, and plan to present that to the full board at our draft 2 meeting on the 9th. And with that, and we'll have time for questions. It probably makes sense for us to get through this presentation, if that's okay. And then engage with questions. So.
Alphabetical, right? I'll go because I'm Heather Ross. I'm the principal at Cornwall, and I say that good now because whenever I hear Peter say fund balance, it sounds like fun balance. And the picture is fun.
Yeah.
Like it's illustrating fun balance, and it's Cornwall students. So anyway, thank you. I'm sorry I wasn't at the last meeting. I was sick, so thank you for letting me talk today. I'm going to keep it short and simple, knowing that it wasn't planned to be part of today. I'll just talk about like where Cornwall is now with enrollment and what we are expecting next year and how that impacts staffing. So currently we have 94 students, which is a lot. In a very, very official, meaning not official at all, way of looking at it. I talked to the teacher who's been there 25 years, and he said he doesn't remember ever being this large, and that was with K-6. But even when I started here and gave this first talk 4 years ago, I had looked at the 10 years before that, and the average was right around 80 to 81. So we're above that quite a bit with fewer grades. But it's been increasing gradually in that time since I've been here. If we look ahead at next year, we did just like a week and a half ago, I just got some information about potential enrollment for kindergarten. It's not official, and it's an underrepresentation is what was explained to me. So I think next year it looks like we are going to be pretty close to the same. It might be 90, 91, but we're still going to be up around those numbers. Which means we have standalone classrooms. So each grade, K1 to K through 5, are standalone classrooms with their own classroom teacher. And we'll continue that, and that makes sense with those numbers. The way that staffing is impacted the most isn't those classroom teachers. It is other staff who are shared across the district, in particular, which it sounds like was mentioned at the last meeting, in particular, social emotional health. And so we were optimistic that using some of the ESSER funding, we could get some more counselor time, which unfortunately we just didn't get applicants, even with the funding there. So we don't have more counselor time. And as we get bigger, especially coming out of the pandemic, as we get bigger, those needs are getting greater. So that is a challenge right now. We have a counselor 1 day a week and then one every other week for a second day, which doesn't feel sufficient for our student body. So that's probably our biggest challenge. The other one is the same that everybody's facing across the district, across the state, probably across the nation, and that's, when people are out. I mean, we have very dedicated, fabulous teachers, but they get sick, and their kids get sick, and they need to take time off, and finding people to help when that happens is the next every day. Something which is probably addressed by other principals last week as well. But I'm very grateful for the teachers that we have, and because they're there when they can. They're there all the time. They can be. So we just do what we can and flex what we can, and that's what we did today. So thank you.
Go here, sit down. Nice, go ahead. Hi, Derek Sears, the principal of Salisbury Community School. I apologize for not being here a couple weeks ago. I had a family planned trip out of town, and so we were out of town. Schedule moved, so I appreciate you accommodating that. But I want to come here and talk a little bit about us and where we're at and a few things we've been doing that I think relate to budgetary things. I apologize for Heather. directly behind you. Did watch the meeting on Middlebury Community Television, and I echo my colleagues in saying we are very much staying the course in terms of our staffing for next year. We have 65 students, K through 5. We do have one blended classroom, which is our 2-3 classroom. Other than that, they are standalone. We're looking at very similar numbers and everything I can project forward for next year, so kind of staying there. We also share staff with other places, many with Cornwall. Ripton is also one that we share quite a bit of staff with along the way. Our budgets are very driven by the staff we have. There isn't a lot of extra room in there for a lot of spending and splurging in other ways. So we've really been working to create opportunities without dipping, without those extra monies. We very much enjoy, we have a 40-acre campus, and so we 3 outdoor classrooms. Just this fall, we cut out some old hiking trails that went down through the woods and things like that. Just one of our real focuses in getting outside and being active in our community. Our population is one that I think really enjoys the outdoors, and we take advantage of that. We have a great PTO, FOSCS. They've been really involved and supportive. We just ordered some Salisbury t-shirts. You'll see those around. Had the Holiday Dollar Store coming up this week. And FOSCS is also funding through a lot of work on their own, funding our 5th grade annual trip to Kuwait called Peak. We'll look for at the end of the year. Recently, we also try to find ways to create new opportunities. Recently, we just started a coding and robotics program that is being run by our librarian, Megan Sutton, and myself. For right now, we're running it after school, but our goal in very near future is to increase equity by being able to find ways to build that into the school day as we go forward. Staff members have also been working on grants and other ways to find ways to bring opportunities into the school. We have a Children's Literacy Fund grant that has brought books built to our school to the Salisbury Free Public Library, and we'll be giving students books along the way. American Heart Association Challenge. We're getting our kids moving in late January and February. Another grant we'll be bringing taiko drummers in for the end of the year, things like that. So we appreciate those things. And also, I'd really like to highlight some of the critical work that's being done by our Title I interventionist, and a lot of her pay is paid for through Title I funds. We are a high poverty school, and therefore we are a Title I school. Lily Foster does fantastic work, and she's working very well with our teachers to really focus on phonics education and really getting students to really kind of understand the words they're reading, and not just kind of do it by rote and do it by memory and things like that. They do really research-focused stuff. And one thing I appreciate greatly is her focus and their focus on our staff and data-driven understandings of things around literacy. Really rigorously progress monitors. It's really funny to see someone get that excited when she's like, I just crunched the data. This is great. So really over the next several years is to focus very specifically on literacy. That's one of our goals, which we've worked together and identified through one of the new structures at ACSD this year is problem-solving teams. And we've used those to really identify literacy as being a primary focus and where we need to dig into a little bit. So thank you very much, and come on over to Salisbury sometime.
Question.
Sure.
Can you indicate a few successes that have transpired, let's say, over the last few months at your school?
Absolutely. We had a parent who called and remarked they had multiple students come through the school system and through the elementary school. And they were in one of the classrooms that's working really closely with Lily on this literacy stuff. And they were talking about just how much their students now, or their children, are reading to them at home. They said, we haven't experienced this. This is, I guess the kids got a little competitive at home and started being like, well, I can read. And so I think, and actually I could point to, I don't have it here, but point to genuine data around this focus on literacy that shows clear and marked, quite rapid actually, improvements in students.
That's, I think, one of the things that's spreading across the country is to have family reading time with the kids to increase their literacy. So that's excellent. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right.
So here we are.
first draft of the FY '24 budget. I apologize for the mask here, but it's better than passing along what I had over the weekend to all of you here today.
Thank you.
Bear with me on the audio. So, as Peter laid out in his overview, it looks like Nicole might have some of the handouts there.
Yes, who would you like me to get them to?
Anyone who wants them.
I think they're in board packs.
They're also,
Yeah, it's hard to see them.
they're also
Yeah, you can get it if you'd like it, but it is.
Don't worry if you want a paper one, we still love you.
Okay.
It's an overview of the general fund.
I still use all S's.
Yeah.
To start us off here, just some top level numbers. We've got a small increase in expenditures year to year, but that takes into account every single dollar that we're spending in the district, which ESSER funds are a big part of that picture, as we're going to see later on. Local revenues, when we talk about local revenues, are all state and local revenues, including all the special ed census block grant funding and tuition payments to districts. Ed spending is our general fund expenditures minus those local revenues. Equalized pupils are the weighted 2-year average that we get from the state. And finally, you see that bottom number, education spending per equalized pupil, and that's going to be the number that we see later on tied to the tax rate calculation. So where does our money come from? I think we're talking about that Vermont Ed Fund, and all of your tax dollars go up there first before they come back to us as Ed Fund money. In addition to that 83% of our funding, we have that general fund, state and local that I was just talking about. We have federal grant funds. We have ESSER for the last year, and then a tiny bit of Medicaid and bank funding as well. In the general fund, how do we spend our money? You can see almost 60% is spent on teaching activities. That includes salary and benefits for our teachers, as well as supplies and dues and fees, I think.
Could I ask a question? When you said the teaching activities includes the salaries of teachers, does that, where do the special education teachers fall? Do they fall into the special education budget, or do they fall into the teaching activities?
Special education budget.
So their salaries are included in the special education section? Okay, thank you.
The other slices of the pie that you see there are our central departments, which augment the building-based teaching activities to give us the whole picture of how we spend dollars at the ACSD towards educating our kids. Here's a breakdown of that top part of the general fund that you all have in front of you. And we're going to get into a close examination of each of the major central departments here tonight. Worth noting is the Tech and Career Center budget, which is still in red because they have not finalized their budget yet. And so once their number is finalized, we'll be able to plug in a final FY24 figure. Based on the last presentation that we saw from them, we used a 16% increase as a placeholder for that line. Similarly, we are negotiating our new transportation contract in the spring, and so we won't have a final dollar amount for transportation costs heading into next year until we complete that contract negotiation. To be conservative, we took the high watermark of our current 5-year contract with ECHA, which is this year, and added 4% onto that. Again, with the hope that it falls under there, and that we can, negotiate a starting point of a new contract that's lower than our current ceiling. So I'll go quickly through the budget drivers again, because I know that we've presented these to you before. In FY24, we expect to see the record inflation starting to decline, but for the time being, it's really driving the ship. So a lot of that has been factored into the pricing of commodities and energy that we're going to see in the budget tonight, in a way that doesn't necessarily mimic the 2023 inflation, FY23 inflation numbers, which are at 7% now, but tries to kind of catch it on the downslope that we're going to see next year somewhere. Facilities is also a big driver in the repairs and maintenance realm. We've seen a multi-year unmet need in the repairs and maintenance realm. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the deferred maintenance projects that we have going on. What we have talked less about is how much we're actually fixing things on the fly or continuously. And that budget has been far under where it needed to be to contain all of the dollars that we're putting towards maintaining our buildings. And so the increase that you're going to see in the budget this year is really just to meet us where we have been for the last year or two, repairs-wise, and doesn't necessarily seek to kind of contain anything new. That said, with all of those P1 and P2 repair needs, we also felt like it would be prudent to build in a small agile construction reserve. The idea here is that it's sort of a medium project fund that can allow us to respond to a breakdown of the system. It's not going to, replace a roof or replace a building, but it's something that can allow us to respond district-wide to something emergent over the course of the year and be prepared with a little bit of flexibility to meet that challenge. I was talking about inflation. Here's just a quick chart of what the rate of inflation has done since 2018. You can also note that, and I use the facilities budget here because that does contain the energy costs, does contain a lot of those repair construction costs. So it's a real bellwether for what inflation's doing to prices. Our first budget in FY21 was that fourth bullet there. In the FY22 budget book, we printed a revised budget, and you can see that right away we realized that we needed to start spending some more money on facilities as COVID was starting to take hold. That kind of set the new the new paradigm for where we've held for the next couple of years, even though inflation has continued to climb throughout that time. And hopefully in FY24 we start to see those inflation forces fall, and we can expect that some of the prices that push that facilities number up and up will start to level off and help it start to come down. We've talked a lot about ESSER, so I won't sit on this too long, but this is the last main year that we're able to use ESSER funds, and so we've tried to obviously factor those into the budget, but also start the process of thinking about what the post-ESSER budget is going to look like, about what the decision-making process is going to look like regarding those positions, and about the process of really having some amazing assets that we've brought into the district that have done amazing work that we want to keep and hang around, and realizing that that's going to create a need to clear room in the budget to maintain those folks and to maintain those positions and to keep the status quo on a lot of those initiatives that ESSER has given us the opportunity to start. Obviously, enrollment as it goes down creates fewer people to pay into the public school system, and so we're seeing a 1% reduction this year. That kind of continues the trend that we've seen over the past 3 or 4 years, even though enrollment has been frozen for the last 2 or 3. And then starting next year, we'll start to see the effects of the new weighting system, which is going to, again, recalibrate our equalized pupils and have another impact on our budget because of that. Here's just a quick visual of our local ed spending. So that's that general fund. Sorry, the local ed spending number from the bottom of the budget doc there. With ESSER tacked on top of it, so you can kind of see what the effects of having that money, having those funds at our disposal has been. And what an FY25 3% increase budget might look like stacked up against what we're requesting for 24 and where we were in 23. And all things considered, with the ESSER money there, it's kind of flat across those 3 years. Healthcare, 12.7% across the board this year, which we're paying for all of that. So in order to be a little bit more efficient with how we budgeted healthcare dollars, we were able to reimagine HSA funding. HSAs, if we funded 100% of them, we'd be, putting too much money there. And if we obviously can't underfund them, but so the right number is right somewhere in the middle. By changing our strategy slightly in terms of how we fund HSAs, we're able to save a little bit of money to offset some of those healthcare costs and bring that down a little bit. And pre-K is up 9.3% this year, and no net change in enrollment, so that's going to be another thing that's driving that part of the budget up slightly this year. And we already talked about the tuition at you're up. And we can tag team this too. Okay. So, with each of the directors for the departments, I'll invite them to add their comments, but I'd also like to just start by saying a few things about each one of them. So, on the tech front, we kept FTE is about the same. We can scroll forward to get to some of those bullets. I think there's 3 bullets. But especially in tech, we split apart hardware and software for the first time. Those things had been lumped together in a way that really wasn't showing us what was what and what we were spending. And so by splitting them, you can see that explains some of those big percentage numbers on the right-hand side. And it also helps us to roll out our new rolling device replacement plan, which I will tell us a little bit more about.
Sure. So we're providing a device for pretty much everybody in the district now, at least instructional staff and students. So we're maintaining a fleet of about 2,200 Chromebooks that we're trying to replace every 5 years, although it often is sooner than that based on damage. We're moving in the direction of providing Chromebooks to faculty members rather than PCs or Mac computers, so that number of Chromebooks is actually going to be going up over time.
electrification of the district. So we've added quite a lot more devices. They become more expensive, in the neighborhood of say 30% more expensive. And we've also added a lot of subscriptions for various web-based tools because we're pretty much living in the cloud 100% at this point. So it was necessary to add more funding to pay for more devices and to pay for a lot of these subscriptions. We have ongoing classroom projection replacement that we do every year. It depends on year, but it's anywhere from 5 to a dozen projection systems. We're doing that based on what are the oldest systems in the district. And that's kind of an ongoing thing.
Thank you. And I think I always have to remind myself that rentals and leases in the tech budget is all of our photocopiers, and we're in the process of working with Canon to renegotiate that contract this year too. So there's a little bit of a question mark surrounding that, but I think we were kind of pushing it ahead level based on what we've been spending. Bruce, you're up.
Great.
I'll kick you off here.
Okay.
So facilities has borne a lot of inflation costs, as I said in that earlier slide. Has had a history of unmet funding needs in the repairs and maintenance department, and has had a need for adaptive response money to respond to priority construction projects in a responsible way. So, that.
Yeah, so just looking through my budget, salary and benefits, that represents all the custodial staff, to take care of 9 buildings. And, we've struggled to maintain staff, and I still have a lot of open positions in my department. So that 10% represents, the possibility of doing something for those positions in the future, in the coming year. Energy utilities, thankfully we have pre-bid stuff that as far as fuel and electricity rates are regulated, so there's not a wild increase there. Landscaping is a little misleading because that actually includes all of our snow removal. So, that's a year-round expense, which has been underfunded since we unified, simply because we basically used the high school budget to do all of the landscaping and snow removal needs for the district. Repair and maintenance, as Matt mentioned, has been underfunded for a number of years, and if you look at the budget, the expenditures over the last couple of years, you'll see that they far exceed what we had budgeted, and we exceeded that budget because a lot of the repairs that we had to do were COVID related. We did get some funding for that, but we still just had such quantity to get through that we exceeded that funding as well. And it's really related to HVAC equipment. And so what we've done is we've gone through and patched up our HVAC district-wide. However, we're still running on borrowed time with a lot of it. It's just, it's going to need a lot of under-loving care. Construction services, as Matt said, he reworked that. So we actually put a little more flexibility in there. That money was for things, if we have a system in a building, fail that we weren't expecting, then we have some money to deal with it. I think the specialty equipment, which is down on the bottom, that's to give us some, or supplies, I'm sorry, supplies and equipment's down on the bottom. That's increase reflects, just the inflationary numbers that we're anticipating. So construction services, I want to go back to that, like, for example, we created a couple of rooms within the middle school this year that weren't there. We had to put up walls, we had to adjust systems to meet codes. And so those types of projects, we didn't have the flexibility to do before. We overspent the middle school budget this year doing that.
Yeah, historically, those have kind of had to wind up in repair and maintenance, even though that's not really a fair portrayal of how that money is being spent. It's more of a construction capital improvement on a small scale.
Hi.
Kick it over to Nicole.
Right.
Do you want to?
Hi, everybody. Do I want to hold my name? I can make it a necklace.
Both of you can squeeze in right next to Matt.
One down.
All right.
Oh, that's it.
I feel like as the director of
Didn't sound very
services, I should say, we all kind of need a movement break. It's easy to get saturated with all this information. Okay, let's see. So the big change, some of you might notice, you get, is that I put asterisks up here, and that's because as I'm beginning to continue to understand this role, I'm beginning to understand that historically we discussed this as a special education budget, but the special education budget also overlaps with student services. And so I'm trying to help all of us, including myself, get a better idea of that. And so the items that have asterisks, that's because there are portions of that funding that provide student services. So you'll see direct instruction has gone up about 7%. There are no big changes. We continue to look for special educators to hire. We're currently 4 positions short. We've been short 4 positions all year. Hopefully that will change this spring. Psychological services has a large increase. We are expanding our evaluation planning team, which is, for those of you who don't know, is made up of 2 psychologists, one of whom we've not been able to hire. However, we're partnering with Castleton for contracted services, and also they're writing a grant, and they're putting us at the center of it. We're not close enough to Burlington, and we're not close enough to Rutland, and so those 2 communities have a better chance of hiring psychologists, so we're hoping Castleton can help us out. We're also going to add a special educator to the eval planning team. We currently have 2, and we're gonna hope to find a 3rd. Speech language pathology, we, since I've been here 4 years, maybe it's been longer, some of you could tell me, we've had 7 SLP positions. We have had 5 staffed, at least for the past 4 years. We have contracted services with a virtual provider. That is a little better than it was last year, but it's not the same as employing people. Occupational therapy and physical therapy are both contracted services. There's a little change with that. Other support services is sort of a catch-all for things that come up in special education plans that are atypical. Administration is mostly clerical and a tiny bit of me because of the way our grants work for special education. Technology is our, for those of you who don't know, our software, which we've changed twice this year. Not because, which is true of the whole state. I think we're finally landing in a good place. And then transportation, that transportation is for students who are placed outside of the district. I believe right now, the current cost to transport a student for services in Burlington is $56,000. So you see our total budget's up about 8%. And then, is there anything I didn't say that you wanted me to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing that special ed really shows us, maybe more clearly than any other department, is that, you know, the uniform chart of accounts that gives us these function codes in our financial software gives us these names, but behind the scenes, we've been working really hard on a logic model that kind of uses sort of names and terminology and sort of functions that work more closely with how we're actually spending the money. And the project that we're working on is how to make what we actually do fit into this in a way that tells the full story. And so you can expect us to kind of keep seeing the picture clarify in that regard, so that under these headers you have a little bit more of a clear idea of like what they're representing. And we're going to see if we can make some fresh headers.
I have a question. The transportation, is that separate from the transportation contract we have with Bencha STA, or is that a separate entity? And by the way, SLPs, as long as I have lived in this state, SLPs have been like Ken and Steve. So.
Yes, it's separate from Betcha.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, we contract. What Matt just said on the right, that's that piece about reorganizing the budget. So Matt and I have been working really hard. Most of the things go to Matt for helping dig into how to create an understanding that is much more clear and user-friendly. So more to come on that. It's actually pretty exciting. It's important to also understand that this budget includes an expanding of alternative programming. For those of you who don't know, we currently have a collaborative consortium with Addison Northwest and Mount Aid. We have a 8th through 12th grade program that's located in the first floor of Vermont Sun. It's wonderful. We're expanding, because that's going so well, to include a middle school program, and that will start this coming fall. So we'll have 6th grade through 12th grade alternative learning, the 3 districts working together. And that's, those 2 locations support students' IEPs, 504s, ESTs. It's about a student's need, less than what their plan says. And then the final piece I wanted to highlight, because as Matt was saying, this budget doesn't necessarily show, is that the special education portion of the budget reflects about 30% of our total contracted services with CSEC. So the other 70% are part of more the general education, but are also student services. And the total this year, although they're not all filled because they're struggling in the same way we are, the total of this year is, if they were to fill them all, somewhere in the neighborhood of $850,000 to $900,000 for CSEC services.
Hi, thank you for this. I'm confused. I'm bad at reading this stuff. Like, isn't psychological services and SLP, aren't other things part of direct instruction? Like, what is direct instruction?
That's a great question.
Okay.
I didn't say it.
Okay.
So direct instruction covers mostly teaching, so special education staff and special education paraeducators. In psychological services, we currently, our psychologists and eval team focus on evaluations, not on providing services. So it's not considered direct instruction. Direct instruction is a special education terminology from federal law.
Okay.
And then SLP, can't remember what you asked about that, but they provide direct services.
They do services, so that's not part of direct instruction though, that's a different.
We don't consider it part of direct instruction.
Okay.
To be honest, I can't tell you exactly why, but I can find out.
Okay, no, and then, can I just have one more question? Well, I have a number of people that ask me, like, how do we compare to other districts? I have a friend who teaches in another district, and she seems to know a lot about this, and she was sort of talking about the comparison. Can you say anything about that? Like in our last annual budget thing, you said we were a low spending district compared to other ones. And I'm just curious what that means and like how much lower and why?
That's too important a question for me to get wrong. What I can do is share, we just received the state sends out the block grant chart that explains
Okay.
everybody's funding.
Right.
So I'd be happy to share that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, I don't even know off the top of my head who the high spending districts are. And I know that they
Yeah.
stopped tracking that when we left the reimbursement model,
Okay.
but I could find out some more.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Okay.
I have heard that also. Meaning, I heard that when I came, that we're low spending, and I was like, oh.
Someone was quoted as saying it in our last annual report. To be honest, I thought it was you, but maybe it wasn't. And so I'm trying to figure out what that means for
Yeah, the state,
why there would be such a disparity, I suppose.
the state used to rank.
Right, okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
Should we go over 173 funding, like that's gonna be on the next?
Yeah, I was gonna ask about,
See if it comes up.
yeah. I was gonna ask about one.
Chip, did you have a question?
Wasn't the case that there was maybe discrepancy across the state by districts as to how aggressively they would clarify or
Identify.
categorize students?
Yeah,
Okay, which, if you aggressively do that and get a little more money, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are better or worse or whatever. But that may cause some of the difference. Now, obviously, this is gonna be a little different. Am I wrong in that, or
You're
is that?
actually, I really appreciate your bringing that up. I think a really good example is in some districts, in order to be placed in a residential facility, which is typically the highest cost in special education, let's pick a number, 200,000 a year, that you would have to be on an IEP and you'd have to jump through all these IEP hoops. ACSD has, my understanding, as long as I've been here before, that we focus on student need, not on their plan, and so some of our costs aren't captured, and so we come off as low spending, but we're still taking care of students. That's my understanding of what was happening, which is similar to what Chip is pointing out.
I mean, is Chip's point that the more kids you have in the pool, and then therefore the more people you let, I don't know how you would say it, the right word is let in or agreed to be seen, considered as special ed needy, that would qualify, that would explain some of the difference.
That used to be, yes.
Okay.
Part of it depends on how, I don't recall, I know I heard this number's been floating around, like the ranking system was designed actually to suppress spending, not to have districts look to spend more than they were. It was to show really Act 173 came about because Vermont spends more on special ed than anywhere in the country. And one of a couple places where that has been highlighted, one is in paraprofessionals. And we have, we've had a lot of consultants that have been hired by the state to come in and talk to Vermont educators. There's been a lot of research out of UVM on this too. When we had our design team where we were looking at our student services model, this was 3-4 years ago, one of the professors from UVM came in and talked about that Vermont, that context of Vermont and paraprofessional use. So that's part of it, is I think if you went to another state, you would see students not getting a one-on-one para as quickly as happens in Vermont. So that's one of the, I think, realities. Another reality is out-of-district placements and the incredible cost of those. We know just from even in our own kind of region, there's pretty significant disparity in terms of places that send students to a placement that could be $200,000-$300,000, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And if you have 3 or 4 of those, your number then is exponentially higher. So I think for us, as we look at kind of where our spending is, there's so many factors that go into any special ed budget that really what we have to be looking at is not our total dollar amount, but we need to expand this as much as we need to meet our vision of what is serving all students. And I think that's kind of what, as as 173 is coming in, it's providing a perfect kind of pathway for us to carry the work that we started with that design team that I mentioned now 2-3 years ago, is it? Was that your first year? To carry that work forward, and that was, I think, in some ways disturbed or disrupted by the pandemic. But we've got a new context, we've got a new funding system, we've got a lot of energy, and Nicole's brought a lot of great energy to look at how do we design this in a way that meets all of these, I think, increasing needs that we see across our community. So that's kind of, hopefully that helps a little bit.
So, just to kind of follow up on that question, I think, before there was kind of a distinct gate that a student had to get through to be able to qualify for special education, and whether a student sort of got through that gate was a factor of, advocacy from parents, and there's all sorts of things that influence what a school district will spend on special education. But now with 173, I guess my question is, that line, like in the prior pie chart that Matt showed about, what we're spending our money on, that line between special education and regular education is getting pretty blurry, right? So I'm curious how 173 will then impact the differentiation of that line between sort of regular education and special education designations, and what that will do to your chart coming up, like in FY25. And so can you speak a little bit to when that's being implemented and how that has changed this or will change? Does that make sense? Does this question make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. The most honest answer is we don't entirely know what the impact of 173 is going to be. The background to 173, which is obviously a state act, is that the federal government requires maintenance of effort, which means that built into special education is the idea that you have to prove that you haven't cut funding, right? That you're making a best effort to maintain services. So even if the state passed an act that said you can only spend X, Y, or Z, we're still legally bound to maintain our efforts for the students who are receiving services. No, that's a different. And so it's a little, it can feel somewhat not confusing that two things are happening at once. We can blur the line, meaning an IEP team can sit and discuss who has the right skill set to support this child, which is not a question we used to be able to ask.
Right.
So that's new territory for us. At the same time, we can't just go into the special ed budget and cut money out of it and put it in the general ed fund because of maintenance of effort. So it's almost like a dance, and I can't say what the impact's going to be, other than I would be surprised if our budget changed dramatically. If anything, it would increase because of the impact of the pandemic. And what we're seeing, which is a record number of evaluations.
I guess I was just anticipating, based on prior presentations you've given, that we might see changes in, obviously dedicated special education staff. So that might shrink some of this, whereas, staffing who are captured in other parts of the budget are then providing these services. And so it might look like on paper that we're shrinking our efforts. So I'm just curious how that dance will.
Yeah, so if we that is the question we have to live into. Some of that staffing we would have to reflect it in the special education budget.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I keep looking at you, but I don't actually call on people.
Thank you. So the program at Vermont Sun, right? I know I had seen this a year ago.
Yeah, I
when I was reviewing bills, and was very intrigued by it. A little more information on that would be great. And is that helping with lowering maybe how many kiddos that we have to send out of district for services at all? By having this collaborative education model?
It's a great question. It's, this one I can actually answer. It's doing a couple of things at one time. It's keeping our kids in the community. The program runs with community access, so they, the students there work on farms, they build boats, they do a lot of things in the community. So it's sort of like checking off the box for community, right? Keeping our kids with us. It's decreasing costs for us by the three of us coming together. I believe by 75% per child if each of those children were to be bused an hour
Right.
each way, right? So it's also checking off the box of what's best for kids. And it's also allowing us to get, to coordinate our mental health services more effectively because the three districts are coming together. So it's doing a lot.
Yeah, so the special ed is flat, but maybe the reason it's flat is some reflection, because the transportation line is the effectiveness of this new program a little bit, because it didn't go up.
Yeah, that's a big.
Because I know looking at the bills, there's so much on, you know, it's kind of mind-boggling when you see the special services and the counseling services and the transportation and, you know, it's been an education, I have to say, looking at those bills. And so that's an interesting approach.
Yeah, I think that the last box I would say is that bringing the three districts together to collaborate around programming is really a special, unique thing. We're the only ones in the state who do it.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
And roughly how many kids are?
Well, we have 12 slots total. We're having transportation issues, so we are up to 9 students and we need to work the problem of transportation for the last 3.
And how many would we be? So 12 is the total at this point.
12 ACSD? 12 total.
For three,
So
three
It's just
districts.
a very big
So
number.
4 students for each district.
Yeah.
And I think we already have one who's transitioning back into our school, which is really the purpose, is it's not to stay, it's to grow.
How different is this from the collaborative that the 3 districts used to do that was with CSAC?
I can't entirely speak to it because I don't know about that one. I don't think it's very different, except that the 3 districts don't partner with CSAC. Are there any other differences? I'm looking to Peter because
Yeah, but I think there were some program tweaks, so you're talking about Champlain Valley Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this program was born out of that program, so that program sunsetted 2 years ago, and then last year, it essentially moved to Addison Central School, the real Addison Central. That's what I heard. And then we decided to find like a spot that was not in a school and found the Vermont Sun spot. So that, in terms of the curriculum, I think there are some aspects that are similar. I think it's been really cool to see the 3 districts come together and really think about this from a county level, which I think as we talk about student services and needs, we realize that we can't do this alone, and we can't do it with our connection to CSAC and our agencies, and then, Mount Abe is doing the same thing, and we've got a little bit of overlap here and no overlap there, and it's really hard to like make all the pieces work because the needs that we're facing are social. They're community needs. They don't live just in the school. And so if we continue to think we're going to solve these in the confines of these spaces, we are absolutely wrong. We need to be doing more of this kind of thing. So I expect that we're going to continue to look at furthering not just the program at the middle level that we're talking about, but trying to bring other partners into this collaborative too. And, it's bearing fruit on other aspects. The transportation, this is not student services, but our collaborative in going out to get bidders for transportation for the next 3 to 5 year contract. We now have 3 bidders instead of just 1 coming out last year, so it's helpful.
Can I ask, who's the administrator in this program?
her name is Gina Fushi. She's the director.
And is she hired by, she hired by the consortium and then who pays it? Does each of the districts pay into this?
That's a great complicated question.
Okay.
Because we were all struggling hiring people this year, we scrapped the decision. There had been a decision at one point of you hire this person, I hire this person, and we literally said, who has the best chance of hiring who? And we had the best chance of hiring the director. They had the best chance of hiring the social worker. We hired the behavior interventionist. So it was just sort of Addison Northwest hired the special educator. So
Patchwork, sounds like.
yeah.
Where does it live administratively?
That's a great question.
Where does it live administratively?
Yeah. So the director.
Who
It used
cuts
to
the
be,
checks to pay people?
Oh, so thank you. So we hold it and then we bill twice a year. And so each district gets like an invoice, like even though we hold it, I just signed off the invoice to pay for our part of the special educator for Addison Northwest.
But Human Resources in our district manages that piece of it.
It's actually Matt and I manage.
since it used to be managed by Addison Northwest by, Kara.
Yes, it did.
Any other questions for Matt? Just a little question about this, is this, and I know, we're just, is this program, or was it historically supported by state funding specifically? Or is this just coming out of the 3 districts? Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Just one question. So with 12 positions across 3 districts, I mean, it must be very difficult to select what kids, who's gonna go. I mean, it's keeping up with the need that we have for this level of special education. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I can talk a little bit about that. I mean, it's a conversation we're having, I think across all of our schools, is looking at this program is working for a student with a certain kind of need. But we're finding that there's not a catch-all, flexible pathway that's gonna work for every kid. And we want to make sure that we, as much as we can, those pathways are porous so that students aren't in 2nd grade, students having a hard time in a general ed classroom, they end up in a program and then they never come back into a general ed classroom again. So what we're doing and what we're talking about, and it's something that over the last 2 months, we've talked a lot about with principals and with other folks, is looking at ways that other kind of levels beyond this kind of small program, but other ways that we can support students that maybe are episodic, maybe are for a certain period of time, that are not like a year-long commitment. How many of those things can be done at the building level as opposed to having them at some alternative place? When you add transportation, it's both a cost issue, but even more important, it's just almost becomes an impossibility. We have talked a lot about scale issue and scaling these up in a small school. So how do you we can't create a program in every school. It's just, we don't have the numbers to do that. So that's another thing that we just kind of look at as we think about the elementary level too. This isn't just a need at the middle school and high school level, it's an elementary need too. And something actually, when I came 10 years ago, we were having conversations at that time, and Mary was.
So this is sex program.
No, not the success program, but we were having conversations with CSAC about standing up a collaborative program with the 3 districts. I thought somehow you were connected to that.
We were trying to do a lot of things back then.
Yeah. Exactly. Anyway, what I'm saying is like, this is not like a new pandemic thing that like brought a new reality. It's something that we increasingly need to do, and it comes back to that kind of Addison County reality too of Burlington is really far and everything is full and you're on a 2-year waiting list.
Yeah.
So for lots of reasons, we've got to look at what can we create ourselves and what is the need. And so that is something that we are actively pursuing right now?
It's always been fun, so.
I'll bring us back to it here. I think we'll wrap up special ed and go to the next slide. Next up is the curriculum and professional development department. We're going to have Caitlin weigh in on that.
I think that there was a pie graph earlier that said that this is 1.7% of the whole budget, so this is really quite small. With the donut, right, the donut said 1.7%. And I also want to echo what Nicole and Matt were talking about with the conversations around the logic model and really organizing our budget in a way that's easy to communicate. It has been very gratifying work with enthusiastic conversations and whiteboards. So it's getting, it's been fun.
Converse with the whiteboard?
What's that?
You converse with the whiteboard?
Oh, yes. Yes, you should see us go.
They're co-opting me now.
So there are just a few things to talk about here. The salary and benefits line is bigger. It's really two big things that are happening there. One is that it's absorbing 15% of my salary, which I'll talk about on the next slide when we talk about waning grant funds. And it's also capturing that new induction model that we talked about earlier this year. The board voted for a higher stipend for our mentors, and this also includes a higher stipend for our 2 mentor coordinators. So the program is running this year, sort of spending, within our current budget, and this budgets it into the future. You'll see tuition reimbursement. That line is, we call it our teachers' master agreement funds. So in the master agreement, all of our teachers, or all of those covered by that master agreement, are eligible for up to 18 credits in 5 years, no more than 9 credits in any 1 year at the UVM rate, which is currently $700 per credit. So when teachers apply to attend professional development, whether it's a graduate course or a workshop that is aligned with their job, first their principal signs off that says, yes, this is aligned, and then we check their credits to make sure that they're within that 18 and 9, and then it comes to me or to Nicole if it's a special educator, and we push that forward. We've had that at about $125,000 for the budget over time, and we're overspending it pretty consistently. The other thing that this has done is our principals don't have that same master agreement allowance, but about 2 years ago, we just said we don't have it in writing in their contracts, but we grant them the same allowances that we grant to our teachers so that our principals and administrators can also continue their professional learning. So this higher budget, the $160,000, we anticipate will cover that expense next year. Professional development is a very broad category. So this year, the biggest thing that we're doing with that is spending on our responsive classroom training across all of our K-8 schools. That was around $25,000 comes out of that pot. And then other things like that. So for instance, we have new principals who arrived in or right before the pandemic who haven't gone away to an IB training for head of school. We're drawing that out of this budget this year. So that's a general professional learning fund. The travel fund complements that. Supply fund, we have in the past given teachers the opportunity to apply for mini grants in the summertime. We really emphasized putting that materials and supplies money toward them as they were rewriting their curriculum. And this summer, we had very few applicants for that fund, which was interesting. I don't know if it's because the curriculum is largely rewritten, and so they're asking for fewer new things now, or because they were exhausted at the end of last year. So we'll need to think about that, rather than reduce that budget, really think about what does that budget look like going forward. So for instance, this past summer, we wrote into an ESSER grant an investment to buy math textbooks for the middle school. That line would allow for an investment in math textbooks or another subject area over time. So there's no requested change in that. Dues and fees includes our International Baccalaureate annual fees, but it's broader than that. So our Vermont Curriculum Leader Association, there are various dues and fees that fall under that line. And then other expenses is really just a general supplies line.
So it's a modest increase to the budget overall. Any questions about that? Yeah, Chip?
There was a comment, I think, in one of our finance meetings, relative to trying to renegotiate the IB dues and fees relative to us having separate schools but a single district. Just for public knowledge, because that's always a question that we get. How much does it cost us to be in an IB system? And I don't think it costs us $100,000 a year, but there is work to try to move us into something that would cost us less.
So it's interesting, the IB annual fees, we pay sort of by the program and by the school.
Yeah.
The middle years program, we pay for the high school, the full rate, and then we pay like a tenth of it for the middle school as a partner program, which is an interesting logic model. It doesn't carry to the primary years program. So we pay for every school rather than one program with partner schools. It would be really fascinating to have them, IB is designed as a by-school program, but we are a whole district, and we're one of, the number I've heard quoted by Cindy Atkins, our DP coordinator, has said a few times recently, there are 12 IB World districts in the nation. That's the total. So we are sort of a special case, and I think that there is a case to be made for reorganizing those fees accordingly. We have had that conversation in the past, but haven't gotten anywhere with it yet. I'm not sure
Yeah,
Peter
they've had a
struck it up
change.
again.
Well, IB's had a change in leadership in terms of the oversight for North America. So I think the time is ripe to have that conversation.
But I'm not criticizing it that we haven't, but I'm bringing it up because that number is up there and I don't want people to get the wrong idea, okay, or that this is static or always.
Just a quick follow-up, is the number that we pay for a primary years program per school the same at each school, or
It's
is
the
it
same at
vary?
every school.
So we pay the same for 40 kids at Ripton, for
We do.
example, that we do for 350 plus at Mary Hogan?
Yes, the IB model is by school, irregardless of
That's
scale.
nuts. That's nuts. Sorry. That needs to change.
Can we go to the next slide? I mean, unless you have more questions about this one.
No, sorry.
So this one, consolidated federal programs. This is Title I, Title II, and Title IV. And when I arrived back in 2016, let me back up. This is a formula grant. These three together, the consolidated federal programs are formula grants. So there's a formula which takes into account our enrollment, our FRL rate, and various other categories to basically tell us what cut of the pie we get from the state's allotment. It's been relatively static over the years, between $600,000 and $800,000 in the consolidated federal programs that we receive as a district. But when I arrived here now 6.5 years ago, we were able to do far more with that money than we are able to do now. So basically the difference is that it's far more expensive to employ people. Our title grants really spend a lot of money, really are a major funder of our interventionist positions, especially at the elementary schools. And it costs more to employ interventionists just like it does any other faculty member now. So because of the increasing cost of health insurance and because of the significant increase in our VISTERS set aside, our Vermont State Retirement set aside, applied to all federal grants, which was around 10% in 2016, 10 or 11%, and it's brushing up against 21% now. So it's just so much more expensive to employ people that we're going to be making hard decisions about which of those positions we keep in the grant, really which slices of those positions we keep in the grant, which ones we absorb locally. And so my position when I arrived was 85% funded locally, 15% in the grant. And we're writing that out because the grants don't stretch that far anymore. So it's one place to absorb locally. So that's why you saw that 15% of the assistant superintendent added to the curriculum budget. Whether that sits in that curriculum budget or in the general administration budget over time, at this point it's an opportunity to say we can't do all we once did with these grants. I'm not going to talk much about our ESSER funded positions because we've done whole slideshows on that. And we're happy to pull up those, when do these things sunset over time? Probably ESSER will end up buffering a little bit of that loss to CFP next year, as we don't cut interventionists, even though the CFP funds aren't stretching as far as they once did. And then the last bullet there is back to Nicole.
Yeah, there's not much to add other than the state brought us together last week and announced, the uniform base amount. And we have some numbers to crunch. It doesn't look as bad as we thought it would. But we're not prepared to say that. It's always gonna be double, triple check.
We're gonna wait till FY26.
Caitlin, what is driving the fact that you're not able, that they're not increasing the funding for this consolidated federal program? Is it static? And then the cost of.
So it's not totally static. So each year I look at the 2 previous years to make a best guess at what we're going to be getting in the subsequent year. We cut our contracts in April, we get our initial grant allocations in June, and we get our final grant allocations sometime between September and November. So we're always sort of taking a chance on, how far will these dollars stretch? So the dollars just don't stretch as far as they used to.
But they're decreasing the amount they're giving you to, or?
No, I wish that I had the numbers actually in hand so I could tell you exactly. They're relatively static. I mean, they vary a little bit, but there hasn't been a dramatic downward turn in how much money we get. It's just how expensive it is to employ people.
Yeah, so they're not keeping up
They're not
with
keeping up with
the
that.
increases.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, every year at the end of the school year, we run what we call curriculum camp, and we use Title II funds to pay our teachers to come back for 2 days, and do some new professional learning and a lot of high energy collaboration. We've done it for 5 or 6 years. I mean, early on when I arrived here, we started this. This is the first year that I can't fit that in Title II. The money isn't there. Usually I write it in after we get our rollover funds in the fall. It's just not there. So we'll look to ESSER to see if we can buffer that this year so that we don't need to cancel curriculum camp. But ESSER won't sustain it over time.
So this is Department of Education, federal money.
It's federal funds sent to us through the state, so the federal.
It originates with the federal.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, they just increased the military budget by a lot.
Right.
We are working on that at the national level. Superintendents are pushing on this, and the biggest issue, and this is on the ACSD organization. The biggest issue is they've never fully funded special ed.
Right.
And it's like way underfunded from what was promised to states. And so that is something that nationally, every year, there's a hard push to increase special ed funding to the level that was promised and needed for states.
And you can look up who votes against it.
Yeah.
That's the last slide, right?
No, that's,
oh no, you got the
it's the
tax
home
rate.
stretch.
Tax
It's the
rate.
home stretch. Thank you all for, bearing with us here. So, we'll touch on taxes and tax rate implications here, to take us home. As Peter mentioned, from the get-go, 15,479 is the projected yield from the letter that we all received, which is a 16.3% increase from last year. It is also still conditional on legislative approval, so, we need to take that with a grain of salt, including that 63 million surplus buy down, which they've anticipated using, but haven't guaranteed yet. They were also careful to point out in the tax letter that districts shouldn't expect this kind of treatment moving forward, right? This is the end of it, right? We are coming down from the COVID surplus fueled years, and this is gonna be the last time where they have the opportunity to to take that extra money and apply it to the tax rate. So that was an important caveat, I think.
Can I ask about the, you said it's conditional on the legislature approving it?
Correct.
Is it something that the governor has to sign, and has the governor indicated what he would do about that? $63 million is a lot of money, and he is not.
Kick that to Peter.
Sure. So the December 1 letter, you may have talked about this at the last meeting that I wasn't here for, but the December 1 letter has certain statutory regulations that it has to apply all of the surplus to the tax rate. That generally doesn't happen. For example, we apply a bunch of last year's surplus to universal meals. Might do that again for this year because that was just a one-year appropriation. So when Matt says to take it with a grain of salt, definitely take it with a grain of salt. But ultimately, the legislature will calculate the yield, which is what it does, based on how the ed fund is going to be used. So that's really the tool that the legislature votes on. The governor has generally always just said, whatever you calculated, that's what it'll be. Because the education fund is such a different animal, it's self-leveling, whatever local districts decide to spend, that's how much gets raised. And it's sort of out of the legislature's hands as to how much spending it is, other than things like universal meals. Which I have a question about, but it may have been discussed at the last meeting, but I didn't know if the current budget projection reflects that program ending, or if it makes even a difference anyway, since it's funded by fees.
Yeah, I mean, we presented the food service budget on the master document, but it doesn't really factor in because it has a different funding source than everything else. A quick overview of our ADM from the last few years. As I said earlier, we were frozen for the last couple of years, and coming down off of that freeze for the first time. We saw a 3% drop. Go to the next slide. In terms of equalized pupils, kind of the same story, heading into next year with a 0.8 decrease. Okay, so when it comes to tax rates, when the expenditure budget goes up, the tax rate goes up. Seems pretty self-explanatory, but it's good to kind of go through. When local revenues go up, tax rate goes down because more money offsets how much we have to raise from taxes. That can be in the form of grants or tuition from other districts. It's worth noting that we've seen a lot of interest from Lincoln in terms of tuitioning students in. Remains to be seen what kind of effect that could have, but that could potentially represent some new revenue. Similar to expenditures, when net spending goes up, tax rate goes up. When equalized pupils go up, tax rate goes down because we're sharing between more students. Education spending per pupil, when that goes up, tax rate goes up. When property yield goes up, tax rate goes down. So it's a little convoluted, but it's just a good kind of mental walkthrough of all the basics that are kind of clunking around mechanically behind the scenes to get us to the tax computation here. Here we are. So ed spending is our top line there. Equalized pupils, again, we asterisk because it's preliminary. We'll obviously wait to get our final number, but projecting that one for now. Takes us to that final equalized tax rate of 142, which is an 8.3 or 13-cent decrease from where we were at last year. All of which is pre-CLA, which, as you all probably know better than I do, is the adjustment to make sure each town is paying their fair share of the property taxes to the ed fund. And we don't have the CLA numbers yet, so those will be forthcoming. So, next steps, we'll finalize the tech center tuition, we'll finalize our equalized pupil rate, we will go through and clean up some of the loose ends in the draft as they relate to the departments that we presented today, as they relate to some of the individual schools, which we heard from the principals last meeting, and we're gonna kind of go into detail on the numbers behind those schools at the next meeting. And then we've got a finance committee meeting this week where we're gonna discuss the use of the fund balance and have some recommendations for that for the next time we meet. For reference, our existing fund reserves, so in addition to the general fund, we have three other funds where we keep money. Ed reserves, capital reserves, and health or HRA reserves. Having that extra money in the HRA reserve really does back up any risk that we, could possibly take on by thinning out HRA in the budget a little bit.
Relative to the reserves, a year ago, when we voted, the town, we voted to put a lot of that money in the capital reserve toward the kitchen project. And then the kitchen project, nothing's really happened this year, correct? So we haven't spent the money, or I guess I'm a little confused on that.
Yeah, I just signed the paperwork today, actually. Chris, do you want to give an update on that?
Yeah, so.
On the fund as a whole.
Yeah, we haven't expended a lot of those funds yet. We've had some expenses related to design work, but as Peter mentioned, he just signed a contract with the architect today that really kicks off where we're going. And last week, I think it was, he signed the contract with Breadloaf.
Those monies are in these numbers?
Right, so that's already been allocated, the 1.2, correct?
That's why I'm confused.
Right.
Yeah, we set aside over 2, so Matt, is that represented on this slide?
I don't want to speculate, but I know that what we have set aside is over 2, so it wouldn't make sense that that's coming out of there. My guess is if that was already earmarked, the current fund balance wouldn't have shown it, and that this is in addition to that.
Well, can we make sure to clarify that? Because there seems to be some indecision about this, and I think that's, I just want to make sure I'm sort of reading this in the right way.
Sure.
Yeah, the action we took prior to the kitchen was the fund balance from FY '21.
Many years back.
Yeah, it's like you have to think like one beyond where you think you would want to say.
Yeah.
But the board we had come forward with a number of different projects that we were working on, was the last kind of action we took, and then we went off and did those. So I think we do need to double check this just to make sure that.
I just want to know where that is.
Right.
If it doesn't show up in this, where is it sitting? Okay, I just need that concept to sort of feel.
I believe this is probably, we've expended some, but not all, so I don't think it's a pure, we had 1.2 in the reserve, we allocated 2.2 or whatever it was for the kitchen project, and that's not showing up here at all, so
It could be encumbered, but that's.
that's exactly.
Where is it on now? I just am
Yeah.
putting it out there so that
Yep.
I understand it better.
Yeah.
Since I'm supposed to understand
Let's not understand it.
The FY '22 fund balance, that I assume we'll vote to do something with at the next town meeting.
Yeah.
Is how much?
1.5.
And
it. You see my point.
that's the last slide.
Okay, couple of questions. First, just general, if we could put these charts in the meeting materials, in a board pack, that would be awesome. So later.
You mean the slides
The
or
slides,
the charts?
yes, the slides.
Okay,
Yeah, that'd be awesome, because
absolutely.
the charts are also there. One item that we didn't cover, which went up 20%, is school board and district administration.
Yes.
And so is,
I'd be happy to talk about that for a minute.
yeah, that'd be
So,
great.
yeah, within that school board and district administration line, that 20% increase, in addition to, the healthcare increases that affect every department, has our contingency fund in it.
That's right.
The contingency
That's
was corrected
Yeah.
this year to represent 1% of the total budget, and so that was a $90,000 increase on that
Right.
line. We also hold general insurance in the school board and district administration category, and so that has gone up a lot this year based on cybersecurity and workers' comp increases across the country. We also moved our director of communications off grant into this department this year, which represented another local absorption of an FTE. And then the school board stipends got increased, and that's held in here too. So those four things were the main drivers of that.
I remember you talking about that now, the last meeting, thank you.
All right, any last questions before we move on? So if the threshold was still in place, how much would we be over it and falling into the proverbial double taxation?
I don't know.
Because I know that we had, as a board, we voted to put, 500,000 into giving it back to the taxpayers as a way of offsetting.
Yeah.
And we knew that the next year, which the next year ended up being COVID, that it never came to pass because that we were already gonna have to cut 500,000 out just before we even started the budget. So I'm just kind of wondering where we might be in that.
I think I can speak to that a bit. So, one, it's a really complex question.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks. I mean, it's complex because so many things have changed, right? So our revenue has increased dramatically. And we've added a bunch of positions, so that complicates the picture. We also have a totally different weighting system that's coming in place, which is why that threshold has been suspended until FY30, is to allow the weighting to come in. So places like CBSD that are, losing $16 million, I mean, that is the impact of the weighting. They're one of the most significant, or maybe the most significant district.
CBSD is living.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so this is a tax capacity issue, right? I mean, they can present a budget each year that shows 1%, 2%, 3% increase, but because of the weighting changes, their equalized pupil number is going to plummet.
Yeah.
Because they're not, they're just not going to have the same capacity they've had. So to answer the question is hard because we have to see what our reality is post-weighting to be able to determine. And then, of course, they're going to come up with a different suppressor of, or some kind of guide for spending once they see how things have settled out. I think they knew if they kept some kind of threshold and a place like CBSD was so many $1 million impacted, I don't think communities would stand it, frankly. I think they knew they had to let this settle out, let the new weighting settle out, and then determine, okay, here's our quote unquote new landscape. Where do we go from here? But Peter is knee deep, and I think a lot of these questions.
Yeah, I think he explained it perfectly. Yeah. Okay.
So are we anticipating that suppression strategies from the state level won't reemerge until FY30? Is that a realistic expectation?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the meantime, they're just letting districts just go, climb, and then at some point,
breaks are gonna be thrown by the state and we get in trouble.
than the one we were facing in FY '20?
I would characterize it as that, the state is removing any penalties, from boards who will hopefully continue to present responsible budgets to the voters.
Well, it's so diplomatic.
The legislature doesn't decide how much is spent on education, school boards do.
Yeah, but without any suppressive history has shown that Vermont has no problem
spending.
Right, yeah, I think that the issue with the pupil weighting is, again, it needs to get in place, it needs to go through its 5-year implementation and then sort of see where things are. And, I think that if the voters are gonna ultimately see the effect of it.
Yeah.
And, they still can be very good cost control, a very good cost control mechanism
in some communities.
in some communities.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, we were considered one of the higher spending districts. We haven't gone hog wild. We are not presenting budgets that are massively, like we're not going out and trying to present, we're gonna, all this other stuff with, we're trying to be responsible, and if we were at the top of the heap, I don't think anybody else is, I think people are scared of this just happening. Are we gonna be hitting this cliff in 2030, and when we get there, we don't wanna be, on the bleeding edge, and so.
We don't wanna be toppled over.
Exactly.
Well, and I think we'll feel it even sooner because as Matt pointed out, at a certain point, we're gonna, all of these ESSER funded positions, if we wanna keep some of them, we have to open up room in the budget, meaning we gotta find out how we're gonna afford to continue to fund those. That's where the difficult decision making will come.
All right. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, all of you. Do we feel everybody's ready to move on? We get to revisit the budget at our next meeting. Oh, actually, which brings me to, we have 3 meetings scheduled for the month of January, just want everyone to be aware. If the first meeting on the 9th, if we sort of get done what we feel needs to be done, the second meeting will be removed on the 17th, and then we'll just have the one on the 23rd.
And the 17th is a Tuesday.
Yeah, it is, because Monday is a holiday.
Oh, that's
Martin Luther
true.
King.
Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
So just everyone be aware of that. Okay, on to policy review.
So
Actually,
folks that need to go.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your participation. And for being here. And you're also free to stay.
So the 9th, 17th.
June 23rd.
True colors, okay. True colors.
So the 9th to the 23rd, Jamie will be our number one, the 17th is.
Just follow the crowd.
Okay, as if those guys are leaving Mary, do you want to?
Okay, yes, we're talking about Title I policy.
Just the first pass.
It's like,
We won't wait for
it's like you walk.
All right, let's go. Okay, so, for policy, Caitlin is gonna talk to us about, reviewing the, Title I policy. Sure. So the Title I policy is, it's a very strange one. It's largely prescriptive. The VSBA model tells us what we are supposed to do, and it's a little bit of paint by color and fill in the blank. And it does require stakeholder engagement to build it. So we did our best to do, it's challenging to do authentic stakeholder engagement when it's fill in the blank to bureaucratic policy. So we did the best that we could to engage stakeholders in basically their opinions about how best to engage stakeholders. And so the policy that we have put forward is ACSD. I don't want to say interpretation, but we filled in the blanks of this prescriptive policy for Title I stakeholder engagement.
Question. Yeah, so I think we've learned quite a bit with this strategic plan for equity. And I think one thing that we have learned is some of our traditional ways of reaching out don't get to people. So I would hope that we could update this to reflect that a little bit, because it still talks about, you know, all the electronic ways of notifying folks, but many folks that really this is addressed to may not necessarily be linked in electronically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I read this yesterday, that was the one thing that popped up, especially after, you know, having gone to the Zoom session that we had on the strategic plan for equity the other night. That I think we have to reimagine a little bit of what that means. How do we reach those folks? And this seems kind of more traditional what we've done.
Yeah, so we're open to suggestions for places to wordsmith, and it really is wordsmithing. We don't have the leeway to really overhaul this thing entirely.
Right.
I do want to specify that Title I stakeholder engagement is applicable to our 5 Title I schools, 2 of which, Bridgeport and Salisbury this year, are SWP school-wide program schools. So the FRL eligibility rate is high enough at those schools so that basically it means that every student in those schools and every family in those schools are Title I students in their Title I families. Those are our stakeholders. It's much easier to do stakeholder engagement in that context where we're all in this together. Our other Title I schools are Ripton, Shoreham, and Mary Hogan. For those, our FRL eligibility rate is low enough that they qualify for targeted assistance only. So that means that the Title I services only get directed to those students who are most at risk of not meeting high academic standards. So when we do stakeholder engagement in that context, and we're supposed to be, and we are engaging the families of Title I students, to some extent we're outing the students who are struggling the most. And so it's complicated and a little bit fussy and messy. And so we do the best that we can with doing that in an authentic way. I don't love this policy. And I would say, and I'm totally, actually very happy to take your recommendations for how we can improve this and update that. I don't think that this is our highest leverage policy in terms of stakeholder engagement, right? The engagement that we do for our whole community, for all 9 schools, that's really powerful and impactful, and really getting that right, I think, matters a ton. And I think that we have to lean on our Title I schools to really put this policy into practice in a way that makes sense on the ground. So this prescriptive policy also came with a prescriptive set of procedures, and our principals in each of those Title I schools are engaging stakeholders on the ground there to write the procedures for their own school. So, you know, for instance, I happen to know Mary Hogan is done writing their procedures. Some of the other schools are still working on them. I can't remember which ones have finished them. I think that there is more to be gained by them doing those procedures well at the school level than us spending a lot of time on it at the district level. But again, Barb, if you have specific recommendations, I would love to see them.
Okay, cool. And that it was only really because I had just listened to the Zoom, participated in that. But something as simple that, you know, in some cases mailing information instead of relying on social media. And it could be in Spanish or whatever. You know, I would assume that we probably know if the home that would be my assumption.
And we are obligated to translate, and we have been working that problem for years, and we're making much bigger strides now that we have our multilingual community liaison. It's exciting.
And it's just kind of using those lens that we've learned and kind of read it through again, and it's maybe just changing some words around there, but it's not just kind of the business as usual, the, you know, the social media kinds of things that we do. But to maybe mention that so that it, you know, triggers in the mind of maybe principals, that kind of thing, when they do the procedure. Just, was just a kind of, it hit me, you know, when I was reading it.
And on the community engagement committee, we did talk about this, many of the things that were brought up at those, that Zoom session and the, meetings at school on how to expand our outreach.
Yeah.
And to target.
Yeah,
families
so
who
there
really
might be some
need to go.
tweaks that we could do there, and across all 9 schools, obviously, we want to be consistent.
Right,
We wanna-
right.
Yep. Thank you.
So this policy is for review to be voted and amended. Sometime in January.
Subsequent, yeah.
Right. Okay. Okay, but now you need one.
Thank you.
Oh, the other ones are, student attendance and, the mascot.
These are real factors items.
Yep, so this next
These
one is
were,
action.
these were things that were reviewed, from our December 5th meeting, and weren't here to, vote on them.
Yep.
To amend them. So the attendance one is, again, the SBA standard. Each of the schools, along with, the administration, Peter and his group, sort of sets the procedures on what those are. I have to go in and look at all the different schools and try to find where these, attendance procedures are, and they're clearly stated in most of the handbooks, so,
Great.
those are updated, so, I feel that policy really clearly factors that in. And then the second policy we're
Well, let's
looking
get this, let's do the
Okay.
first. So why don't we have a?
Do both?
Oh, do we want to do both? Okay, we'll do both.
Yeah.
Are these action items or are you reviewing?
No, these are action items.
E and C are.
That's what it says.
Amend and adopt.
Adopt and amend.
So should we do them both together?
Yeah, do them both together, okay, sorry.
So the other one is about the mascots and branding. This is new legislation. Maybe a year ago, the legislature said that we need to not have, mascots or branding that is, discriminatory. So this is.
This is a required.
This is a required policy that is responding to and setting up some sort of mechanism where, because this has already happened in a lot of places, and it was awkward in how it happened.
Yeah.
It divided schools.
Rutland,
Definitely. Although hopefully timers won't go extinct too soon.
But, yes,
Well, no, I mean, it's a real thing to have,
Sure.
when you get it, in fact, it's, maybe there are some districts out there still that someone would find.
There are.
There'll be challenges, there's a procedure and not a challenge.
Right.
Okay, so can I have a motion? I'll move to approve, the amended C7 and to adopt F2.
And I'll second.
Great. Questions or comments around either of these? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great. There's very much, Policy Committee. We appreciate your work. And that brings us to other. There's a request from Emily that we get a board photo. So I would request that everyone arrive to the next meeting 5 minutes early with your best dress on, and we will take a photo.
And if you can't make it, bring a cutout.
Send a cutout. Send the cutout. If you can't make it, how are you gonna bring the cutout?
Send the cutout.
So that we can take a photo.
It's a good
It's for the budget book. Any other?
I have another question.
Yes.
Can someone explain to me what the procedure that was outlined in the public comment question about the flag?
So.
I don't know, I don't quite understand exactly what he said at the board.
The board has to vote on it every year.
Every year.
Yeah.
And we vote on it and then let it go, let it expire, is that basically what?
And then if it's brought to us again, then we'll vote on it. The student group has to bring it forward.
But the policy doesn't say that.
No, the policy doesn't say that, but the motion that allowed, where the board decided to take the action to raise the flag, that motion limited that
To a
that
year.
to one,
To
to
one
the
year.
end of the academic
End of
year.
the school year.
So it doesn't
Last
really
year.
say in the I just read it.
Yeah.
The policy doesn't say that a student has, or someone has to come
No,
to get it on there. So it's something that we as a board.
we could put it
We
on
could
the agenda
decide
and do it
to
ourselves.
put it on the agenda, and which is why, what I think we should do and talk about it.
Or we could have a different system and a different flagpole.
Right.
We go back to that.
Yeah.
Right,
That's
You
really.
could do that. There's a lot of support for that
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
There's a real discrepancy in the support.
yeah.
The
Plus or
reason
minus.
we did not want to keep it in, perpetual, constantly up there. We wanted there to be a time limit on whatever special interest or whatever special reason was out there to put up a flag. So,
But to clarify, Jamie, it was a board action and a board decision. It was not something where student came in. So it's, the policy does not necessarily provide for anyone to come in and make a special request to fly their flag. The board kind of identified it as its action,
Right.
so, but it can,
I mean, I understand
agenda.
that it was, fairly long and controversial, all these things. But I'm just curious because someone did say this today, and probably other people will. And so what are we, does that require us or suggest that we should open up that conversation again, or how do people feel about that? I'm just curious.
I mean, go ahead.
Well, so someone can ask for the executive committee to consider getting it on an agenda.
I see.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
so,
Yeah, that was what I was gonna suggest,
Yeah.
is that we actually put this on an agenda when we have, outside the budget, wait until the budget is
Yeah.
done.
Sure.
But I think it would be a good thing to talk about
Discuss it
again, and have it well worn so people know it's out there.
Other? Oh, wow, 3 hands, lots of.
I was wondering, because it was presented to the board, are we going to get any sort of an update on the request for the sabbatical, or is that a closed matter? Or is it not appropriate for the board to be briefed on what happened?
Question.
it's a personnel.
Well, it's a board.
I understand we can't
Well,
discuss it in open
just
session right now.
contractually, the contract is very clear that, as a teacher, you can apply for a sabbatical, and it has to be approved by if it's approved by the principal and the superintendent, then it goes on to the board for final approval. If the principal and superintendent do not support that, then it does not go on to the board. So right now, according to the contract,
It's not our issue.
The matter's been resolved.
Yeah. There's a larger question around, in negotiations, it could be a question that, the association may bring forward, say we want to change the language to guarantee 3 sabbaticals per year and this and that, and that would be a negotiation.
And has the association become involved in this particular case or not?
Not really, because we haven't, there's no, we followed the contract to the T in terms of how the contract is written and have supported the unpaid leave for the employee to go with, which is fairly challenging in terms of a staffing position, we're in a somewhat tough position with that, but we have supported that.
Was the request denied by the principal?
Are we?
Yeah.
If we were just material.
This is
Right, it's a personnel issue and, the policy's been followed and it doesn't rise to the level of the board. Other.
I was sort of on the same track, honestly. I didn't mean to bring up personnel issue, but I thought we needed as a board, we needed a little clarification.
Peter.
This is kind of a big decision on my part, so I asked for a moment during other business to announce that as of the first, or now that I hear that there are 3 meetings, or second meeting in January, it's going to be my last meeting on the ACSD board. I'm going to step down at that point. And largely this is due because I expect my duties to significantly increase on the legislative front, which is going to make me less able to commit to what I think is necessary to be a strong board member. In addition, both leading the legislative committee that looks at education policy on a statewide basis, and at the same time, serving on local school board can present some challenges in both expectations and responsibilities. So I really have come to the decision that serving just one set of voters is going to be cleaner. So I just want to talk a minute about the process. So the process to fill a vacancy on the school board is fairly straightforward per state statute. The school board needs to announce the vacancy, and probably a good idea to advertise it maybe with a legal ad in the paper, on the website, or whatever board decides. And then the board will appoint someone from Cornwall to fill the position for the remainder of the term, which expires in 2024, as opposed to just until town meeting day. The process in between that is largely up to the board. But when the board last filled a vacancy, it interviewed the candidates at a meeting, discussed the candidates in executive session, and then voted in open session to make the selection. Just to give some history as to what's been sort of the previous process. There's no prescribed timeline on this. You just need to do it when you can, so maybe best after the whole budget process is done. But I did want to sort of get it out there before that, just in case there was a need to sort of get the wheels moving on, or just to get the word out so that people are aware of it, and so that after mid-January, the board can move expeditiously should anybody choose to step forward. Maybe I'll have something more profound to say at the next meeting. But anyway, I just wanted to put that forward. And despite the fact that the stipend has been increased significantly, it wasn't
Damn.
Would 1,500 have made a difference?
I should have been here at the last meeting.
I have a question. Peter, is there no way that we could just put them into the general vote of town meeting day?
Correct. My term doesn't end until 2024.
So you're, okay, so you can't just, you know, use this term and then open it up?
It would change. Then that changes the dynamics of how many.
When I first came on the board this time, I was appointed by the board.
Okay.
To replace, Quinn, who was the business, who became the business manager.
Oh, I see, okay.
Well, I don't know if there's anyone between then and now, but I was interviewed as others were, I guess.
Yeah, I was appointed to the Mary Hogan, or in the, what was it called?
ID4.
Board as well, so same
So
thing.
it's a process, yes, but it gives us some latitude to hopefully recruit or choose the right person to fill it out.
Yeah, it used to be there was a lot of discussion about whether the select board of the town from which the person comes from should have the power, but the bill that was passed this year concerning unification and all that clarified that the board gets to appoint the replacement.
People volunteer.
Can you imagine?
Right.
Although there are, right, in the other two Addison school districts, they have vacancies.
Unfilled vacancies, yeah.
Yeah, unfilled positions.
Well, the Northeast does, I think, Addison, or Mallory does as well.
I commend you for doing that. I almost expected it, knowing what you were going to be coming, because we have had great benefit of having your type of inside information on this board. But it does cross over a little bit when you become a leadership position in that situation. And actually molding, if not directing policy and trying.
Come on, Bernie did it for
So,
years.
you can all haul me before the board to ask questions and yell at me for what we're doing at this legislature.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear, but I appreciate the.
We will miss you, Peter.
Yeah.
Learning.
Well, you're not done with me yet.
Can you like type up, please, everything that you know? Some of that institutional knowledge.
Or else. I never thought about
Even just Robert's rules, the little.
I know.
Somebody should have me new
Yeah.
parliamentarian.
Suzanne's pretty well versed in that. All right,
phone calls.
we do this. I'm assuming there's no other. Great. Seeing none, a motion to adjourn, please.
A motion to adjourn.
Second. Great. All those in favor? That'd be great.
Merry Christmas.
8:03.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah, it's happening right now.
Yeah. First day of Hanukkah.
Hey,